Okay, I'm giving the Catholics a shot today. Will this claim of a miracle over 100 years ago be convincing enough for me to head to the baptismal waters of reconversion? Stay tuned while we investigate this famous tale. Okay, I'm giving the Christian fundamentalists a break this week and focusing on a miracle that comes from Catholic origin, one that I remember hearing as a child, and it is the Lady of Fatima miracle, which supposedly occurred a little over 100 years ago. And this one fascinates me simply because of the amount of people present, including many clergy and journalists, that supposedly witnessed this final chapter of the series of miracles, which occurred in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal. As the story goes, there were 3 shepherd children, the main focus of one Lucia Santos, 10 years old, and a brother and sister, Jacinto and Francisco Marto, 7 and 9 years old respectively, where Lucia reports that the 3 children witnessed not only the appearance, but instructions from the Virgin Mary that appeared to them in an apparition. The first visit was in May, where Mother Mary instructed them to pray for the end of the war, and they were instructed to come back once a month on the 13th, which lasted all the way to October. And the children did visit this site on the 13th of the next 5 months, with the exception of August, from what I read there being interrogated by the authorities, which were becoming uneasy due to the new secular government, which apparently wasn't a fan of Christianity and had infiltrated itself into the country years prior. But on the final visiting date in which the Virgin Mary was to appear, word had circulated so much that 70,000 witnesses followed the children to the site, which was in the midst of an oak tree in which this Virgin Mary was known to appear, per Lucia. And on that final appearance day, the skies were filled with torrential rains, and after the appearance of the Virgin Mary to the children, in which Mary told Lucia of 3 secrets and prophecies, the clouds not only broke, revealing the sun, but the sun began to whirl rapidly in a dancing-type motion, flung out multiple colors on people's faces in the crowd, and then descended to earth in a zigzag fashion before it returned to its normal position. And the 3 secrets that the Virgin Mary gave Lucia were 1, a frightening vision of hell for the unrepentant, in which the children were to pray and give devotion for those poor captured souls, the prophecy of the oncoming World War II, and the prediction of Russia's tyranny after their abandonment of Christianity, forced by the new secular communist government, and a 3rd secret not revealed by Vatican until the year 2000, of the immense suffering of the last century of the 2nd millennium of the faithful in the prophesied attack of a clothed bishop dressed in white who prays for the faithful, which was later interpreted to possibly be Pope John Paul II after his assassination attempt in 1981, which interestingly enough took place on the feast day of Fatima on the 13th of May. So at first glance, this possibly makes me want to consider to run back to the baptismal waters of reconversion. For this little girl Lucia was convinced, because she went on and became a nun, and she stuck with her story all the way to the end, all the way to her death in 2005. And why did this tale begin to shake me so much? Because there were 70,000 witnesses, and many of the clergy that were there were not initially convinced. And after the final event on October 13th in 1917, they most certainly were. But now we have to look into the details to this fantastic tale. The defenders of this story have several key points. First, that people's clothes that were soaked were instantly dried after the apparition. Second, the children's stories never changed over time. However, the younger brother and sister both died a few years after the incident due to influenza. And the fact that this child became a nun after the matter, and Sister Lucia never changed her story as well. She stuck with it all the way to the end. Bishop Jose da Silva, in 1930, after investigating the claims for well over 10 years, determined it was a miracle worthy of belief. And according to the young Lucia, the Virgin Mary stated that the younger brother and sister would die shortly after the event, and they did. How could I not believe this tale? Well, because when you're presented with information for a miracle, it's necessary to keep reading. And I did for a bit. But first, my common sense mind has a few contentions. This is a Catholic tale, not a fundamentalist tale. And Catholics are obsessed with the Virgin Mary. which is interesting because I don't remember anywhere in the Bible stating that we were supposed to worship her. Some may consider that even idolatry, but the evidence does seem to be pretty overwhelming, so I went to one of my old standbys, one Joe Nickel, who is a longtime fellow at the Skeptical Inquirer and has made a long history investigating the paranormal in and outside of religion. Interestingly enough, Joe Nickel was once a former magician and private investigator before his PhD, which specialized in English and literary folklore. He is a big name in the paranormal community, and he's also known to enter these investigations with an attitude of the possibility that the supernatural did occur. He's not known for trying to prove the other side wrong, but to get to the bottom of the inquiry. And here's what his investigation revealed. First of all, he investigates the background of the girl Lucia. She was the only one who supposedly spoke with the Virgin Mary's apparition on the multiple occasions she witnessed it. He stated that the other children were documented to largely just be standing there following her lead and asking her how to interact with this paranormal activity. And remember, they're 7 and 9 years old. And this makes sense because the backstory of Lucia was that she was an attention-seeking, spoiled child who was very charismatic and known very much for her storytelling ability. 2 years prior, she apparently claimed to see an apparition of a Snow White figure on 3 separate occasions. And there were also tales in 1916 of an angel appearing to her as if some sort of preparation for the Virgin Mary's coming. Her own mother certainly wasn't convinced of the legitimacy of this tale, as per Nickel's findings, her mother was quoted to say that her daughter was, quote, nothing but a fake who is leading half the world astray, unquote. Well, these are certainly valid points for not believing the story to begin with. But let's look at more specifics. Nickel states that old photographs show that on that day it wasn't raining nearly as much as portrayed. But I don't know if they can really determine that with just a few photographs taken in an exact instance, for it could have been raining hard a few minutes before or after the photograph. But here's where it starts to fall apart a bit. No one in the crowd witnessed a Virgin Mary, apparently, and it wasn't true that all 70,000 people witnessed this so-called dancing sun. And there are many variations of what the sun was actually doing during the supposed miracle, and there were many people that said they didn't witness anything at all with the Virgin Mary or the sun. According to Lucia, after the Virgin Mary's final instructions, she reached out her hand and said, "The sun," and everyone was staring into it, which the photographs do show, if they are the legitimate photographs during that exact moment. Well, optical effects can be produced by putting a stress on the retinal cells, according to Joe Nickel's research. And there was a Catholic lawyer that stated he reproduced this effect very identically a few days later by the same staring of the sun. And apparently this sort of illusion has also happened in other places. One example being Haraldsbach, Germany, where 10,000 pilgrims staring at the sun had the exact same effect on their eyes. And there are meteorological events, according to one theologian, physicist, and priest, Stanley Yaki, who had stated that the enhancement of the air lens and ice crystals could produce refractions of the sun's rays, which might give this illusion witnessed by many from the crowd. Now, as far as things predicted by the Virgin Mary relayed to Lucia, yes, it does seem that the little brother and sister were dead within a few years of influenza. But according to Nickel, Lucia recorded this prediction in 1927, well after the fact. And apparently her prophecy for World War II was also officially recorded after the fact as well. Now, was she verbally saying this to people before the events occurred? That I don't know. And as far as the third secret, well, that includes details of an angel standing with a flaming sword, crying for penance to the world, and the supposed bishop of the faithful who was attacked. According to Nickel, they tried to retrofit this prophecy to match Pope John Paul II, but the problem is, he was a pope, he wasn't a bishop, as portrayed in the secret, and he wasn't killed, even though Vatican does seem to claim that it is a legitimate prophecy. It certainly doesn't seem like one to date. So what would I say? Honestly, I don't know. If I were to give a personal believability percentage, I would have to say it's 10% or under, for me. Because on one hand, yes, there were investigations like Father John DeMarchi, who did hundreds of interviews between 1943 and 1950 in Fatima with people who were both believers and non-believers prior to the event, and he found the variations of the witness of this so-called dancing sun very minor. And of course, we've all stared at the sun too long, at least once in our life, and yes, I can remember the sun kind of jittering. And during my own Zen meditation, if I stare at a focal point on a wall long enough, colors start to appear and seem to float in front of my eyes. And I don't think I'm approaching nirvana, I think my eyes are simply getting tired, or whatever my optics are doing that explain it. And it seems to me, if the Virgin Mary really wanted a believable story, why the hell didn't she just appear, point blank, and then vaporize into the air when it was done? Because if we had 70,000 people who saw that, there probably wouldn't be any question on the matter, and I'd have to return to my old Catholicism. But overall, in Joe Nichols' investigation, and I only put Joe Nichols' investigation as a source, but I probably read 10 other sources that I didn't list because they basically said the same thing, and these critiques that Mr. Nichols presents do seem to be the general consensus of skeptics. So I'm going to go ahead and say that there's probably a 90% chance at least that this miracle falls into the debunked category. But if you'd like to read a miraculous tale that I admit is fiction, check out The Second Fall, an offbeat apocalypse sure to offend my old schoolyard Catholic nuns, and probably a few others. Link is on the video description as well as the banner, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.